In this video, we're going to have a look at the pricing box within the Oxygen Builder. I'm using the default atomic design set. So to get started, we'll open up the structure panel, we'll show the properties, and we're going to add a new section below the first section, and that's where we're going to build our pricing boxes. So to get started with pricing boxes, we'll go to Add, go to Helpers, and inside Helpers, Pricing Box. And then you'll see that the default pricing box loads. So let's just have a look at some of the settings in here before we start creating different layouts. So the first item to look at is the price amount. And there we can set that, and you'll see that that changes the main price amount. Then we have the price decimal, which is the 99. Let's change that, so maybe 50. And if you don't want an item to display, simply delete. So we'll leave that maybe at 99. Then there's the currency symbol, and once again, you can put whatever you want in there, and that will be the currency symbol that will display with the pricing. And then we have the term, which is in this case monthly, or you could go maybe something like once off, or you might want to do something like lifetime deal. So up to you what you'd like to put in there. So we'll just leave monthly for now. And then of course we have the other properties to format the pricing box. One thing to mention before we head on is the fact that you can add an image to your pricing box, and to do that we'd head over to graphic and we would simply say include image, and the image would then be displayed above the rest of the information in the pricing box. So that's just a very basic introduction or overview, and what we're going to do now is start to look at each element and then start styling our very first pricing box. Before we do the formatting though, we're just going to add a few more pricing boxes, and that will just give us an idea of what it's going to look like if we have more than one. So to do that, we've selected our pricing box and we'll head over here in the top left hand corner. We'll duplicate the component and then we'll head over to the section again and we'll stack the child elements horizontally. So now we have an idea of what our price box will look like if displayed with three next to each other. And one of the first things that you'll notice is that there's quite a lot of spacing in the text. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just update this title. So to do that, after selecting the title, I will head over to title on the left hand side, head over to typography, go to title typography, and we're just going to change that line height to 1.2, and you'll see that just pulls it together a little bit nicer. And for the first price box, we're not going to use an image, so we'll head back to the default settings, head over to graphic, and simply just say no. And now we'll just have a basic price box without the image. Now, just one or two other things that we can look at quickly. When we come to the pricing, you'll see that with the pricing in this format next to each other, it's a very busy price scenario, and you do find that your eye bounces around a bit and doesn't really settle that nicely. So one of the options that you have under price is to display that price vertically and then to align in the center. So now your eye tends not to bounce around as much because we see normally the price and then the term. So let's start styling this first pricing box. So we'll head over to the top here to the title and we'll get styling. So here we have the title. So we open up the title and let's give it a background color because that will just help us to identify the different sections. And we're going to make the top color the darkest color, and we're going to gradually move down to a lighter color at the bottom. And what that will do is that will force the user's eye to move down the list to the call to action. So to get cracking then, let's change the color of the title. So we're going to change that color to white, and we're also going to change the for small business text to white. So we'll head back then to subtitle typography and we'll select that color, make it white, and just to differentiate a bit more, we can make that, put that in italics, or no, let's leave it like that. So there we have the basic hosting. Just to look at one or two other options there that we can look at with styling is inside the heading, we also have a padding option, and if we wanted to, we could then also include the padding just to highlight the heading a bit more, or we can remove and leave it in the default. So that looks pretty good. Then we're going to head back down to the next section, which is the price. And before we get going, let's just change the color in the background of the price. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to make that a little bit lighter. And we're going to then change the color of the typography to white. So if we look at the amount currency, let's change that to white. Let's go to the amount main and let's also change that to white. And you'll see that in all of these typography settings, you have the full set of typography options available to you. Then we'll have a look at the amount decimal. Let's also change that to white. And in a case where the decimal is important, you might want to make that a little bit bigger so that people can see it. And then we're going to have a look at the term. We'll also make that white. And now we get to the last item, sale, which is the normal price. So normally $3.99. In this case, let's make that a little bit bigger because that's really too small to read. And we'll also give that a color of white. And to show that the price has changed, we're now going to add a strike through. So we head down here to text decoration, we add a strike through. So now you can see basic hosting for small business. Normally now the new price, it's a monthly term. And then let's go down to the features. So head back to the main settings and head down to features, head over to background, and let's make that background a little bit lighter. So you'll see now that when you look at that item, your eye is immediately pushed from the darker color down to the lighter color. With that in place, now we can head over to the typography, and let's see how that would look if we went with a solid black for the features, and let's make them a little bit bigger. So there we have the feature standing out, and then we have the call to action box right at the bottom. So to do that, we can head down to the call to action, and once again we can set the background color immediately, and we'll make that a bit lighter. So now you can see that when you look at this pricing box, your eye starts off with the darker color, heads down to the lighter color. There's the pricing information, and there is the call to action. And the call to action is taking the default colors for the button from the theme. So to change that, we would change that color then in the theme settings, or perhaps look at some custom CSS for that button. But for now, we're going to leave it at the normal color, and we're going to change the text. So simply click on the button to select that text, and then we'll just change that to buy today. And then here you can see it's taken the default color, and we can come in now and change that. And let's stick with our red theme. And I'm going to make that button a little bit darker so it stands out. And let's make that solid. Let's make the button size 15. And I think the text color of white works. And the text size, let's make that nice and big. So there we have our button, and on the hover, let's make sure the text color remains white. In this case, on the hover, it goes blue. Right, well, let's move on. So there we have the basic layout for our pricing box, and you'll see that it now displays nice and neatly. However, still a little bit distracting around here. So let's just go back to the price decimal, and let's remove the decimal. And now you'll see that it reads a lot nicer, a lot easier. But you'll see that the monthly is very close to the price. So we'd like to move that a bit down. So one way to do that is to head over to price, and then we go to typography, we head over to term, and we change the line height. So if I change that line height to 2 or to 5, you'll see how it moves that item down. So the one way to do it is to then just change that maybe to a 3, and now you have it a little bit nicer. So very easy to read, moving down to the bottom and then to the buy today button. So that is just a very brief look into our first pricing box that we've set up, and now we're going to have a look at styling the second one. For the next option, we're going to base it on the first layout that we created. So I'm going to delete the second pricing box, and then I'm going to duplicate the first pricing box again. And now we're just going to make some subtle changes to this box. So here you can see that the price box now is right next to the previous one, and the colors flow through. So if you are happy with the fact that it does work like that, then that's great. If you'd like to create some breathing space around the block, then we can also achieve that. So just to show you how it works is if I go to the pricing box, you will see that there is a padding and alignment here, but that padding and alignment refers to the padding and alignment inside the element and not around, not in creating something around the outside. So in order to do that, we need to go to advanced size and spacing, and in size and spacing we can there apply some padding, and that would then give some padding to the element. So just to show you how that works then, so we'll add some padding. So now I have padding around the item, and now I can just get some white space between the two items. So in this one, we're just going to do something a little bit differently though, because if we wanted to add a box shadow around the item, so for example, I head over to my pricing box, advanced, I go to effects, and I go to the box shadow, and I do something around there with the black, make that 0, 0, and then 15. You can see that that is one way to subtly differentiate this particular price from the rest. And what we can then also do is give that a border of 5. Oops, wrong place. Let's make sure we've got the right price box selected, and then go to advanced, go to borders, and then give that a border of 5. And that will then just give this a slightly subtle different look and feel from the first one. And then let's remove the last one. So if you just had the 2 and you wanted to highlight this one as maybe being a better deal, the one way to do it would be to do it that way to make it stand out a little bit. And let's say that you did have 3 next to each other. So let's duplicate the first one again. And then let's move that first one back down to the bottom. So now we have our highlighted item in the middle, and you can see in a very subtle way how that stands out from the other. And if we save that, we can have a look at that on the front end. And there you can see that the basic hosting stands out a little bit more. But let's say you wanted to make this stand out even more than it is, then another option there would be to head back into Oxygen, and let's, for example, say that you wanted to add something along the lines of most popular or buy me or something like that. What we would do is we'd head over to that pricing box, and I would just wrap that in a div. right? And we'd make sure that that div width was 33.33. Make sure the first pricing box also has a width of 33%, and the last pricing box also has a width of. Alternatively, another way to do that is to make sure that each of these boxes has a width of 100%. So the way that that would work is to make that 100%. Go to the next div, we'd make that 100%. And then we go to the first one, size and spacing, 100. Now they are equally spaced. So one way to make this one stand out then, now that we've wrapped it in a div, is we're going to add some text, but we'll add it in an absolute position. And to do that, we would simply add some text. So in this case, we'll head over to basic, we'll add some text. And in that text, we're going to just say, by me. And then I'm going to go to the layout and set the position to absolute. And you'll see that that heads up to the top left-hand corner. To make that stand out a bit, what we'll do is we'll give that a background of black. And then I'm going to change the text color to white. And I'm going to give it size and spacing of 20. Apply to all. And then what I'm also going to do is give that a borders and just make that border radius 5. So there we have the item, and without doing anything else, we could leave the item in the top left-hand corner like that, but because it's an absolute layout setting, I can also move that around. So I can head back to layout, and then here I could give it a left of say 20 and a right of 20, and now we see that actually this absolute item is now extending beyond the div block. So in order to fix that, we'll head over to the div that we've wrapped the elements in, and we're going to head over to layout, and now we're going to change the layout position of this item to relative. And the moment I do that, you'll see that that absolute item now fits within that div. So it's now absolute to this particular div, absolute position, but in this div. Now I can move it around a little bit more. So I don't want it to be where it is now because it's actually overlapping. Before I do anything else, I'm going to head over to the text item, and let's go to typography, and let's change that to center alignment, and maybe I want to make that a little bit bigger. Right, and in order to move that out of the way now, I'm going to head over to size and spacing, and I'm going to give that a negative margin of 20. And you'll see that with a little bit of manipulation now, I can set that to be above, but that still doesn't look right. So what I'm going to do is head back to my pricing block. I'm going to go back to my title, and in my title I have padding, and my top padding I'm going to make 50. So I'm going to push down the padding, and then that will allow that text then to come down a little bit more. So size and spacing, and maybe something along those lines. And maybe what I'm going to do is in my layout for that absolute item, I'm going to put that to 60 or maybe 100. Or if I don't put anything in, it will then just be that particular text element. And what I might want to do then is also on that margin, make that something like minus 40. So that sticks out a little bit on the right hand side, maybe too much. But you get the idea that you can now position this element anywhere that you want inside this element. So let's move that back to the center. So head back down to the text item, and then back to layout, and take out the right, and center that element in that div, which then moves that absolute item to the center. So now I have a simple buy me button at the top of the page, but you'll see now that it's moved everything down a bit. So now it's not aligned, and it almost looks like it's been pushed down too far. So I just want to move that up a little bit. So I'll head over to my div, size and spacing, and then the top margin. I can make that minus 20. Maybe that's too much. So let's change that just a little bit and save that. And now you'll see it'll move from looking like that to something along those lines. So there you can see that my item, it appears a bit narrower because of the padding, and it's also moved just with a subtle buy me at the top and buy today. So there you have a simple way just to highlight that particular element. Another way of highlighting is maybe what you'd like to do is add some text at an angle in one of the corners of your pricing options. So let's have a look at doing that in this one at the end here. So what we'll do is we're going to wrap this one with a div. And once it's wrapped in the div, we're going to give that div a width of 100%. And that now make sure that each of these is evenly spaced. And now we're going to add our text element. And in that text element, we'll go maybe just the word special. And then what we're going to do is set the layout of that element to absolute. And what we're also going to do is make sure that that div is set to relative so that the item remains within the div. So over to layout on that div, scroll down and choose relative. Then what we're going to do is head over to our special item. And in this case, I'm actually going to wrap that item with a div and then make sure that that div is set to the absolute position. And then what I'm going to do is just style that a little bit. So what I'm going to do on that div is give it a background color of black. Div is a background color of black. So for some reason the black is not coming through. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the transform option under effects, and I'm going to add a transform, and I'm going to rotate, and I can make that 45, or in this case maybe 275. Okay, let's make that 180. 180 is upside down, so let's make that 90. Let's make that 45. Right, so 45 would be an angle, and what I can do now is head back and go to my layout option, and under my layout option I can set the right hand side to a 0, and then Maybe try a different color. Let's make that black again. Okay, so there we have the item on the right hand side. Let's just head over to the text and let's check the background for our text. Maybe make the text black, and then let's make the text color. In this case, let's give it a yellow. So let's move that up. And let's give it some padding. So let's make that 50 all round. And now you can see that we have our item coming together. And let's just change the bottom padding to 20. And now we're going to move this into position. So to get it into position, we'll head over to the div, and I'm going to go to Advanced, to Layout, and then I'm going to go to the Overflow, and I'm going to say Overflow is hidden. So now you can see it's already cut off the part of the block that's outside of that spacing. So head back to that div item, and now I can start looking at a way to just get that positioned in the right hand place. So I can immediately go with a minus 30. Let's make that a minus 50. And then let's move that across to the left hand side. So there it has come across. Let's take that up a little bit more. Right, so there we have the special appearing. If I want the special to be up against the side, then of course I have the option. Head over to my pricing box, head over to my padding and alignment, and make that a 0. No, that's not going to work. Oh, size and padding here, and remember we changed that back to 0. And now you can see that I have that alignment right up against the edge. So now we've managed to create something different, but you'll remember now that this had a padding of 15, so this is a little bit up on the first item. So what we can do is head over to that div, and we can give that a margin then at the top of 15, and then that will be aligned. You'll see now if I move that, you'll see that it's aligned with the first item. So that's how you can create the text then, for example, in this case, just to put the word special in the top right-hand corner, and that differentiates that from the center from the first one. So I'm going to hit save, and let's have a look at that on the front end. And you'll see it creates something a little bit interesting because these two items are kind of linked together and this one is separate. So it's almost encouraging people to look at this one and to look at this one more. This one is looking a bit isolated. So that's one way just to create a more interesting look in a basic layout. What we're going to do now though is move on and create something that has a few more special effects. We're now going to add a transition effect to the item. So we've chosen our most popular pricing option, and we'd like when the mouse hovers over for this box just to enlarge ever so slightly to highlight the importance of this option. So to do that, what we're going to do is head over to Advanced. So we select the div first, we head over to Advanced. We're then going to look to Effects, and we're going to select Transform. And in this case, we're not going to rotate. But before we apply any transformation to this item, we're first going to change the state to hover. So we're in the hover state. We've selected the div. Now I'm going to go to Transform, I'm going to add my transformation, and I'm going to scale that. And if you want to get an idea of the units, just slide the slider and you'll see that those are the units available. So they go up in increments of 1, and you'll see that if I do a 3, it's a really big increment. So what we'd like to do here is maybe make it 1.2 and the Y scale 1.2. So we just want that to go up a little bit bigger. So that looks like that'll work. And then what we're going to do is create a smooth transition. So at the moment we have a transition, but it's going to be pretty quick. So if I go back to the original, you'll see that it jumps up very quickly. And we'd like it to be a nice smooth animation. So to do that, we'll head over to transition. And here we can set the duration. And as you move the slider, you'll see the increments available. So 0. something. So in this case, maybe we're going to look at a 0.2. And you'll get an idea there of the transition. So that's pretty quick. If I make it 0.5, it's a much slower transition. So let's make it 0.4. Right, so there we have the 0.4. So it gets just a little bit bigger, which is nice. But now you'll see that there seems to be a conflict here with the items to the side. So in order to resolve that, let's head back to layout. And let's give this Z index of 10. And what we can also do is give this div a background color of white. So now when you move over, you'll actually see that the image enlarges nicely. Then I'm going to save that. Head back to the front end. Let's refresh. And now when I mouse over, you'll see that you have a nice smooth transition when hovering over the center object. We're now going to look at the mobile view of the item. So change the screen size to less than 768, and you'll see that our price box is not looking good. So let's just quickly fix that up. First thing that we're going to do is set it to be displayed vertically. So we have the elements now displayed one below the other. We'll head over to the first pricing box, and what we're going to do is in that size and spacing, just add a margin at the bottom of say 50. Then we have the basic hosting by me, and that's followed by the final one with the special in the top right hand corner, and that looks okay over here, but let's just add a bit of spacing below, some margin here, maybe a bit more. So when scrolling down, right, so there we have the items, and you'll notice that the item at the bottom is slightly wider than the first item, because here we have the size and spacing, we have some padding, and we're going to remove that. And now you'll see that the second item is then highlighted slightly because of the white border. So what I'm going to do is just give that a bit more margin at the bottom here. So then we have the by me, which is in a slightly different format, and then at the bottom back to the basic hosting. So there we have the different items set in mobile view, and then let's just have a look at the narrowest viewport, because sometimes that creates something different. But basic hosting, that looks fine. And that looks fine. Maybe just change the margin below that item to 50. Right, so let's go back to the normal size. Right, so there we have our items, and also displayed nicely on the mobile view. Right. To add some lines between these items just to make them, to separate them out so that they stand out a bit more, we can do that with some custom CSS. So these are just standard breaks. So if we want to insert something like this, we can, but just to have a look at the way that it's set up is that if we have a look at the individual items, you'll see that they are just standard break items. They're just separated by a break. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to insert some CSS to make that possible. And to do that, we would head over here to Oxygen. We're then going to go and create a style sheet. Let's manage style sheets, and we're going to add a style sheet, and we're going to call that pricing blocks. We'll say OK, and then this is the CSS that we'll be pasting in. So this just, the first piece of code here says display nothing after the last child, after the last item. So that's why we say the nth last child, display nothing. And then here we have the content and the display and the position that we need. So I'll include this code in the description of the video, and that will insert the line. So if we now go and refresh the front end of the website, we'll see now that we have the line separating each row, and that is set as a standard break. So it styles the space between the items, but not the individual items themselves. And that's why we can put a line in, but at the moment not styling the background of each row. Now we're just going to have a look at a few more options of styling available around the pricing section there. So let's head back to the website. And let's just have a look at what's available here with the price. So if I go into the price and I head over to typography and I go to amount currency, and I'm going to give that a line height of 1, and you'll immediately see that the currency moves to the top. So that's one way to move your currency up, but that's still a little bit unnatural because in a lot of cases the currency and the amount are generally a similar size. So I'm going to change that size to 30. Then I'm going to head back to the amount main, and instead of being that height, I'm going to make that a 30 as well, and I'm going to give that a line height of 1. So now I'm able to create this effect, and of course if I was to make this a size of 50, I could then also head back to the currency amount and also give that a size of 50. And because of the way that this is structured, I can actually come in and then change the color of the currency symbol so that I can still differentiate between the two, but then I can give it a similar size. So that's the one way of doing that. Similarly, if I head back to the primary and let's say that we do have a price decimal and let's say it's 50, what I can do is I can put a comma in there to make it a comma 50 and maybe a space so that it lines up a bit. And then in a similar way, I can go back to the price and I can head over to typography and amount decimal, and I could also make that a 50 and make sure that the line height is also set to 1. Now my price looks the same. I can go back to primary and here I can remove that space. And now we have a more maybe easier to read kind of normal price. So what we might want to do in a case like that is head over to typography and then in the amount decimal is maybe make that a 30. So maybe something like that. So it's all aligned along the bottom at the same time. So That's one way of doing it, and that would also mean then that if I was to head back to the primary, go to price, and then I said horizontal, you'll see now that the price reads in a more normal fashion, or in a more standard fashion, shall we say. Now, if I go back to typography and I made the amount decimal the same, then you'd have 99.50 monthly, which reads pretty standard, as opposed to, for example, if I was to, on this one, head over to price and change that to horizontal, 99 monthly, and if I was to add a decimal value to that amount, so you see that you have this, it's just kind of odd to read, whereas this makes a lot more sense. It's just something that people might be more used to. And in a similar way then, if I change this pricing here to the vertical, you'll see that 99.50 monthly, that's only 2 rows of information to read, to decipher. If I go back here to the vertical, you'll see that it's a little bit more, it's just a little bit busier on the eye to have the small currency, then a number, then another number, and then monthly, whereas this reads pretty straightforward. So just a preference, personal preference maybe. So that wraps up this video on the pricing box. We'll just refresh that quickly. And yeah, I hope you got some ideas, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you for watching.